My dad always liked to have bonfires. We had a couple different spots on our property where he burnt things. He had a burn barrel. I don't know if any of you had a burn barrel, but we did. And it would just be like the middle of August, and then suddenly we'd look outside and there was a fire going, and nobody ever knew what was in the fire, but the burn barrel was burning. And I think he was just throwing brush. He'd throw trash in there sometimes. He'd burn whatever he could find. And then we had another pasture where we had a lot of trees, and so he would throw brush into a pile. Eventually, we burnt the brush so often, there was a big spot where we would have bonfires, and that became a place where we would just collect wood, branches, anything, just throw in there. And as I became a teenager then, that became kind of like one of our hangout spots where my friends would come over and we would just have a bonfire and on a summer night and just kind of hang out and talk and spend time together. And I had a lot of friends that we did that together at their place. Growing up more in the country, everybody had land and had places where they burnt things. Everybody had bonfires. Now, if you are about my age and you grew up going to Christian camps or conferences, you might have experienced a little bit of a different bonfire, a more of what they would have called a holy bonfire. And at those conferences or camps, there would come a point in the week where you would be challenged to give up some of these sinful things in your life. And wherever you were, sometimes even indoors, not always outdoors, they would start a bonfire. And you were supposed to come and bring things and throw them into the fire to get rid of them. No, I don't know about all of you, but when I go to a church service, I don't necessarily bring my sinful things with me to the service, right? So why were there teenagers ready to come in and throw things into the fire? Well, because we did it every year. So everybody knew this night was coming, right? So they would challenge us, throw away some of the clothes you shouldn't be wearing, or throw away your music you shouldn't be listening to, throw away your cigarettes. And people would come and they would throw away clothes that probably didn't fit them anymore, or CDs they didn't listen to anymore, or the pack of cigarettes with like one cigarette left in it. They would throw it in the fire. They'd make these sacrifices that were really more show than they were sacrifice, right? But all these bonfires had the same characteristic in common. It didn't matter whether they're gathered for celebration or for relationships or for actually getting rid of things or burning trash. Whatever we put into the fire didn't come out of the fire. If you put something into the fire, you're done with it, right? You have to be ready for it to never be yours again. It's gone. It's vanished. It's extinguished. It ceases to exist. In 1 Kings 19, we're going to read the last few verses here in a moment, and we see a holy bonfire of sorts. And we see Elisha start this bonfire of things in his life. A literal fire, literal things in his life that he burns. And what we see is the commitment, the sacrifice, the change that comes to Elisha's life because he's willing to put these things into the fire and allow them to be consumed. And once they're consumed, they're no longer a part of his life. And so as we look at this, they demonstrate how Elisha was fully committed to the change that was about to come to his life. So let's look at that change. Verse 19, 1 Kings 19. So Elijah went and found Elisha, son of Shaphat, plowing a field. There were 12 teams of oxen in the field, and Elisha was plowing with the 12th team. Elijah went over to him and threw his cloak across his shoulders and then walked away. Elisha left the oxen standing there, ran after Elijah, and said to him, "First let me go and kiss my father and mother goodbye, and then I will go with you." Elijah replied, "Go on back, but think about what I have done to you." So Elisha returned to his oxen and slaughtered them. He used the wood from the plow to build a fire to roast their flesh. He passed around the meat to the townspeople, and they all ate. And then he went with Elisha Elijah as his assistant. So the last passages we read, we're on Mount Sinai, and God has spoken to Elijah, and he has told Elijah that he is not alone. There are thousands of others in Israel who have not bent their knee to Baal, who have not worshipped other gods. He's told them not just about these thousands of people, he's told them about Hazael and Jehu, who will become kings. He's told them about Elisha, who will become a prophet. He will be the one who finishes the work Elijah has started. And so what we see in this passage is a literal passing of the torch where Elijah comes to Elisha and is essentially, notice there's no word spoken. He doesn't ask him anything. He doesn't tell him anything. He is inviting him to come and be his predecessor, to take up the mantle as prophet, to finish the job that God has started in Elijah. He throws on him this, it says a cloak. Elijah is the first one that we read about who wears something like this, although it becomes a symbol of a prophet. By the time of Zechariah, they all wear one of these. And John the Baptist would have had something like this as well. It is called later literally hairy, so we know that it is fur. It's made of some kind of animal fur. And so because of that, it's something Elijah could have worn all the time. It protects you in the summer heat, keeps you from the sun, keeps you warm in the winter. So it's an all-year-round coat of sorts that everybody looks at and knows if you wear that, you're a prophet. So when Elijah takes it and puts it on Elisha's shoulders, no words need to be spoken. He is communicating that he is being called to take up this cloak and to be a prophet for God. When Elisha is called to this, we notice he goes to Elijah, leaves behind what he's doing right away. He goes to Elijah and says that he wants to go and kiss his mother and father goodbye. Now, in the Hebrew, the word goodbye is not in there. Doesn't exist. It's a commentary from translators. Because when we go to kiss our mother and father, why are we doing it? Culturally, for us, that's a symbol of hello, goodbye, like that, right? It is not for them. It's a symbol of blessing. So it makes sense for us that he's saying goodbye here. It's kind of them saying, why else would he do this? But that's not what he's doing. This is him asking for blessing. It's him showing respect to his parents. But some have compared this to passages like Luke chapter 9, where Jesus has disciples that say, hey, I need to go home and take care of some things. I need to bury my father. I need to go talk to my mother and father before I follow you. Those were stall tactics, right? They didn't want to fully commit to following Jesus. That is not what Elisha is doing here. And we'll talk a little bit more directly about what he is doing in a moment. But he immediately, we know he's not stalling. Why? Because he kills his ox and burns his plow. He's not having second thoughts. Elisha almost immediately fully commits to becoming a prophet in the line of Elijah. He begins to follow him just that next day and eventually takes up that mantle. So as we look at these verses, they look just like three verses that, we're transitioning from Elijah to Elisha. And if I say the names backwards, I apologize. You do the same thing. It's easy to do, right? It's just a transition. That's all that we see here, but it's much more than that. What we see here is Elisha, a young man, being called by the living God to completely change his life, to completely give up everything, to surrender who he is, to surrender his future, to surrender everything, to take up a calling that God has put on his life. He has to completely do away with the old to embrace a new life that God has called him to. And I believe that the living God still calls each and every one of us to do the same thing. We might not be being called to be a prophet or into ministry or to change occupations, but God has these calls on our life where He's asking us to leave behind the old and embrace a new life in Him. And I want to look at how Elisha does that today so that we can learn how we can do that in our lives. To burn the old and embrace the new life that Jesus has for us. So what we see in these few verses is that when the living God calls, it begins with God's faithfulness. What happens in this field only happens because of what God has already done on the mountain. It's not just Elisha responding to God's call in these verses, it's also Elijah. Because why is Elijah on that mountain? Because I'm done. I've quit. I've trusted. I've followed. I've done all the right things, and it has not worked out the way that he wants it to. And so Elijah, after God speaks to him, after God gives him this promise, has to trust that God who met him on Sinai would be the same in Samaria. That the God who spoke to him then and called him to move and do these things would be with him when he went to do them. He had to trust that God would be faithful, and God was. God did exactly what he promised Elijah that he would do. If you make a change in your life, anything, doesn't matter what it is, if you're making some kind of change that comes from God, it doesn't begin with you deciding to make a change. It begins with the faithfulness of God that has brought you to a place to enable you to make that change in your life. We don't respond with transformation. We respond to grace. Whatever new life we have doesn't come because I did something. Doesn't come because Elisha made a decision or Elisha burnt his plows or Elisha gave up his oxen. None of that is what changed his life. It was the grace of God that put that calling on his life and enabled him, gave him the strength and power to do what God was calling him to do. And so Elisha can't say, well, I can't do that. This isn't for me. Why? Because that's true and God doesn't care. It's not about our strength or our ability that enables him to call us. It's his faithfulness to being who he's always been that enables us to follow the calling he puts on our lives. So whatever God is calling you to today, it begins with faithfulness. Second, we see that when the living God calls, it requires change. Elisha has to change everything in his life. When Elijah meets Elisha, what is he doing? He's plowing the fields, right? Looks like he's just a farmhand, right? A worker. That's not what we see in this passage. Notice it says he has 12 teams of oxen. So here's what we know just from these few verses, these few words. He's got land because he's plowing land. If you had land and you had one team of oxen, you were extremely wealthy. So if you've got lots of land that requires 12 teams of oxen, you're really wealthy. So Elisha has this wealth, his family wealth, family money, that promises him security. It promises him a future. If he just stays where he's at, he never has to worry about another thing in his life. And Elisha has to burn all that, to leave it all behind in order to follow what God is calling him to. That's not God saying, if you've got money, you got to throw it into a fire. No. It's God saying that when he calls us, something in your life is going to change. God never, not in a single time in this book, can you find somewhere where God shows up to somebody and says, I just wanted to come and tell you you're good. don't change a thing. I love just the way you are. Don't do anything different. That doesn't exist. When God calls, it changes your life. And if you think you responded to God's call and your life looks the same, I got bad news for you. You ain't responded. Because when you respond to the call of God, it changes everything. He always calls for radical, deep change in our life. He's not looking for surface level changes. He's not looking for cosmetic changes. He's looking for deep heart and life change. If you're searching for new life and purpose and meaning in Jesus, it's always going to require you to change and to be different, to be something new. When the living God calls, it requires sacrifice. Elisha doesn't just change careers. He burns his old life to the ground. His old life is a heap of ash at the end of this passage. He doesn't leave behind tools, he incinerates them. He doesn't just go back to driving oxen the next day because he's eaten them for dinner the night before. Elisha has left behind wealth, family, future, his whole life. He's giving up everything to follow Elijah and become a prophet of God. He holds on to nothing. There's nothing he carries with him. And so as we begin the season of Lent this week, we often talk about sacrifice and surrender and fasting, and yet we do that for 40 days because we're remembering Jesus' fasting for 40 days. It's symbolic of that, but it's so much more because every day as we fast, you give up something. Every day we get closer to Good Friday, the end of Lent. We're reminded that the little that we've given up, that Jesus gave up everything for us. Because when you follow the calling of God, it requires sacrifice. Just like it did for Elijah, just like it did for Jesus, something has to go into the fire. Elisha can't hold on to the plow and the cloak. Something has to be sacrificed and given up. He has to make a decision. And whatever taking up that calling to follow Jesus cost us is nothing compared to what he does in our lives when we do respond to what he's called us to. When the living God calls, it requires wisdom. Elisha has asked to go to his parents, and we've said that is for a blessing. It's also for wisdom. He's going, this is not some knee-jerk reaction. He doesn't just want to burn down his old life without talking to those who have wisdom and experience. He's not asking for permission. He's not asking for them to say it's okay. But before he responds to things, before he acts, he at least wants to run it by those who have some of that wisdom. See, we are supposed to be responsive to the voice of God in our lives. And there are times where when God calls, we have to act, we have to move. But being responsive to the voice of God does not mean that we have to be impulsive. God desires us to seek wisdom. He asks us to seek wisdom, to go to his word, to look for counsel, to talk to people. Not because we need somebody to tell us what to do, but because God uses his words. God uses those voices to help us know the direction that he's moving us in. There are many times in my life where I can think back where I wasn't sure where God was calling me to go. I knew he was calling me to move, but I wasn't sure the next step. I wasn't sure the next turn. And I went to wise people in my lives who didn't tell me what to do, who didn't push me in a direction, but God used their words and God used their stories and God used their advice to help me know what the right next steps were. It was still God's voice and God's calling, but his wisdom was given through others. When my dad would have those bonfires, he would always require us to drag a hose wherever we had one. Get that hose as close to the fire as you can. Why? Because you want to burn everything that you're burning, but you don't want to burn everything. Right? Fire without wisdom is destructive. You just start throwing your life into a fire, and you're going to destroy things and rip things apart that aren't meant to be destroyed and ripped apart. Fire with wisdom is refining. It purifies and cleanses. It makes our hearts and our lives what it is that God desires them to be. When God calls, it requires commitment. Elisha does more than make a sacrifice. He does more than make a change. He commits. The plows are firewood. The oxen are dinner. He can't wake up the next morning and say, you know what, I kind of like plowing the fields. I think I'm going to keep doing it. It's too late at that point, right? He has committed his life to this new calling. There's no going back. God is not asking us to just change a few habits. God is not calling us to just kind of trim off the edges a little bit. You're a little rough around the edges, let's just smooth it up. That's not the calling that God has in your life. God is asking for you, for all of you. And God does not want some of your attention. God wants all of your attention. And God does not want some of your mind. He wants you to love Him with all of your mind. And God does not want some of your heart. He wants to fill every corner of your heart. God does not want some of your life. He wants all of your life. We sang the song today, I surrender all. Do you know why we sing that song? Because if we sang the truth, it wouldn't sound very good. I surrender some doesn't have a very good ring to it, does it? I surrender almost everything. I surrendered most of it. If we sang those words, we know how foolish they sound the minute we utter them. But the song of our life, that's what it sings so often, isn't it? Because we surrender all of the hard things to God. We surrender all the painful things to God. We surrender all the difficult things to God. We surrender all the broken parts of us to God. Elisha didn't take the oxen that were sick and the plows that were broken and throw them into the fire. He took all of it. And that's the kind of commitment that God is asking of you in your life. Not some of it, not parts of it, not the parts you're willing to give up, not the parts are out of control and you can't do anything with, all of it. Every bit. So some of you are standing in that field right now and that bonfire is roaring. And you know the things in your life that need to go there. You know the things, the habits, the brokenness. But you've thrown easy things into the fire. You've made changes that don't cost very much. You've surrendered enough to feel better, but you haven't surrendered enough to be different. And that's what God is calling you to today. Commitment is not allowing God to have some of your life. Commitment is allowing God to let the Holy Spirit set your whole life aflame. Every part of it, every relationship, every thought, every action, everything His. That's the commitment we're called to. He wants to burn that old life down to the ground. He wants to make a bonfire out of your past. He wants to make a bonfire out of your sins. He wants to make a bonfire out of the things that you hold on to in this world. A bonfire out of that old life. Not to burn it down, but to build something new. Because when the old is washed away, then a new life can begin in Christ Jesus. The fire of God does not consume, it does not destroy. It creates something beautiful and new. That's the promise. That God makes beauty from ashes. That He brings life to death. That He takes what's old and makes it new again. There's one last thing that's very important. See, we talk about this stuff a lot. Surrender, sacrifice, because it's important and because we're really bad at it. Because we know what we're supposed to do. It's really hard to do. I don't say any of this stuff thinking that it's easy, because it's hard for me. It's hard for all of us. And so we often walk away, I think, and beat ourselves up. And we think about all the terrible things that I still do and all the things I haven't let go of yet. And that's all true. We're all still figuring this out. We're trying to find how it is that we can live this life with Jesus better. We're all still letting go. Nobody lets go of it all at the very beginning. There's still more that you have to sacrifice. It is not a one-time choice. It's a daily choice every day. But when Elisha burns it all down to the ground and has this holy bonfire, I want you to notice what the last verse says he does. They all get together and they eat the oxen. That detail, I think, kind of slips away. People in that day would have eaten like this maybe 3 times a year. Especially if they were poor. They didn't get meat, but maybe only on the pilgrimage festivals. It'd be like Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so to come together, and when you ate like this, it was a party. Elisha is celebrating the change that God is bringing to his life. This is not a funeral. This is a party. He's not mourning a loss. He's celebrating what he's gained. And so, yes, we can sit and beat ourselves up over the things that we're not good at yet, or the things that we haven't done yet, or the things that we haven't let go of yet. But I'm looking out and I see so many of you have already thrown so many of those things into that fire. I've seen the new life that God has brought to you. I've seen the change that he brought to your life. I've seen sins given up, addictions broken, cancer healed. We've seen God work and the fire of his Holy Spirit burn and make us pure in his image. And so let's not mourn what we haven't done. Let's celebrate what God has done. Let's rejoice. And may it point us forward to what God is going to continue to do, because God is faithful and will continue to be who he's been in your life. The God who changed you before will continue to change and refine you today. Together, we can begin. So I'm going to encourage you. You know, if we were talking and I was saying, hey, there's sins and addictions, I would tell you, if you see that in one of your brothers and sisters' lives, you need to talk to them about it. You need to pray with them about it. You need to point it out and help them with it. If you've seen change in somebody's life, I want you to talk to them this week. Call them. And say, I've seen you grow. I've seen God work in you. I've seen that change. Encourage them and celebrate together the goodness of God that we see in each other. And that will be far more powerful than the condemnation that we so often bring as Christians to one another. Let's celebrate what God has done, because it points us to what God is going to do. Now, I like to read and learn about what churches that are different than mine, or churches that I haven't grown up in, the things that they do, their liturgies, their traditions, all those things, they're powerful to learn about why they do them. We all have different ones. We all have different things that mean different things to us. And one I learned about a while back was what's called a watch night service that happens in African American churches. It happens on New Year's Eve. They start somewhere between 7 and 10 p.m. and it goes till midnight. And it's, from our perspective, that might look like just a New Year's Eve service, right? That's leave one year, celebrate into the new year. But the roots go back much further than that. The roots begin with the fact that when slavery was allowed, New Year's Day was the day that slave owners settled their books. So they would look and see what they owed, and they would sell property. They would sell houses and furnishings and slaves. And so families get together on New Year's Eve because they might not be together again the next day. And so it was like a last time together. We have no idea what tomorrow holds, but let's come together. And they worshiped and they celebrated and they rejoiced together, even though the next day might have been their last. But then it changed. On December 31st, 1862. That night was known as Freedom's Eve, because when midnight struck that night, as they were together for their watch night service, they weren't sold into other homes the next day. At midnight that night, every slave in the Confederacy became free. And they rejoiced. They celebrated. Why? Because they were free. And freedom is worth celebrating. So as the worship team comes forward today, if you realize that you were a slave, and you had been a slave, and you'd been in those chains, and you were given that freedom, would you ever stop celebrating it? Probably not. You'd never forget it. But you have been freed from the bondage to sin and death because Jesus listened and followed the voice of God, his Father, responded by giving his life and surrendering himself for us so that we could be free. And if the Son has set us free, we are free indeed. And we should celebrate. We should rejoice at what is true in our lives because of what Jesus did for us. We're free not because we've burned enough plows, not because we've surrendered perfectly, and not because we've managed to change ourselves. We are free because God is faithful, and God has moved, and God has saved us through his Son, Jesus Christ. When Elisha burnt the plows, he didn't hold a funeral, he held a feast. When that old life goes up in smoke, something new is beginning. That is the promise of our God. He takes ashes and makes beauty. He takes graves and makes gardens. He takes mourning and turns it into dancing. And some of you need to light that bonfire today. Some of you need to throw some things into that fire. But hear this clearly. The fire is not the end of the story. The fire makes room for resurrection. It makes room for new life. The living God doesn't burn away the old life. He builds something new in its place. So let's celebrate. Let's celebrate that we have a faithful God who keeps his promises, who is the same today as he was yesterday and will be forevermore. Let's celebrate that our lives have been changed because of the love and grace of God that we see in Jesus Christ. Let's celebrate the sacrifices people around us have made so that we can know about Jesus Christ, so that we can know of his grace. Let's celebrate the wisdom they've shared that have kept us from some of the trappings of this world. Let's celebrate that God makes beauty from ashes, grave from gardens, takes our old life and makes it new. Let's stand and sing this song today, and as we do so, let's sing it as those who are free and celebrate what God has done in us and promises to continue to do in us. Let's sing this together today.